The ideal clay court athlete, Stefanos Tsitsipas wins Monte-Carlo, and Rafa's return to the main tour. That and more on this episode of Beer Garden Tennis. Let's crack on. Welcome back, everyone, to Beer Garden Tennis. I'm here with the Colf Man. How you going, Colf?
Yeah, good, Josh. Good to be back. Episode 2. Looking forward to it.
I think we're in the top 50% of podcasts now that have actually done an episode 2. I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves, though. We still have to record the thing, but we're on it.
We'll just keep chipping away. We'll just keep chipping away and see where it ends up.
So, in the last episode, episode 1, we talked quite broadly, I would say, having listened back, about where people are at form-wise and maybe where some of the best players in the world on the ATP like to play, their favourite surfaces. So today I wanted to knuckle down on the clay, because that's where we are in April 2024. We're in the start of the clay season. So I did have a question come through just in the last 24 hours regarding that first pod. A friend of mine asked what types of athletes do suit different surfaces better than others, because we referenced that as though that's common knowledge in the first pod, that different kinds of athletes maybe work better on different surfaces. You, as the accomplished tennis player, can you just give us a quick 411 on why people's games maybe suit a surface and not another surface?
Yeah, great question. Obviously, on the ATP Tour, you've got different athletic profiles right across the board. You know, we mentioned guys like Alexander Zverev, 6'6". We did mention in episode 1 that his movement so impressive on the clay, which is probably a little bit of a surprise considering his height. You don't normally get those guys that are that tall, outstanding movers on the clay. They like that, the hard court surface, for example. So in terms of referencing clay court season, which is just getting underway now, you're probably looking at the guys that more the smaller guys in that typical 5'10" to 6'3". They seem to be the guys that more compact, more low center of gravity, that get around the clay and change direction a lot better. In terms of he's probably not doing so well now, but a guy like a Diego Schwartzman, for example, former top 10, I believe, probably just inside the top 10, had great results on clay when really pushed Rafa at the French Open there a few years ago. He's probably on the smaller side. He's probably that 5'9", maybe 5'10", but a guy like Alcaraz is perfect. We know he's the total package in terms of his his athleticism and his entire game, net play, baseline play, movement wise. But 6'1", really strong legs, low center of gravity. He really fits the profile. Nadal's the same kind of build.
Yeah.
About 6'1", maybe 6'2".
It's been described by my dad as rugby players playing tennis.
Yeah. And for the fans out there, if you just get a chance during the clay court season, pay more attention to if you get a chance to watch on television or even highlights, for example, just pay attention to more the physical build of the players. Look from the hips down, those quads, really strong in the legs. And we're talking most of the guys that are full-time on the professional tour, especially those guys top 50 that have the success week in, week out. They're on their legs all the time. Tennis is played from the legs up. We say that a lot in the coaching space. There's a lot of youngsters out there that are developing, but very rarely do you see those guys, unless you're an outlier like you're Zverev, who's been a number 1 junior in the world, who was touted to be a possible future Grand Slam champion. No surprise that he's able to do what he does. He's, for lack of a better term, a bit of a freak in that regard, where Clay's probably, he's had the best results probably on the clay, some Masters 1000 success, semis of the French Open. But really looking at the smaller guys, in that 6'1" mold, where just explosive through the hips, through the legs, and are able to track balls down like you wouldn't believe and play defense. Novak Djokovic, he's probably a little bit more leaner, but he's still he's not extremely tall, 6'2", 6'3", great flexibility where you can play that defense and play a lot of balls defensively at stretch, at full stretch out there, using those levers. And the ball's not always going to be in the hitting zone for these guys. A lot of the time on clay court, you're you're really scrambling and you're hitting balls out of position. So guys are able to do that at a world class level. You find that they get the results at the biggest events.
And I think on the clay, maybe more than any other surface, sometimes the game lengths maybe aren't out to these classic Wimbledon Australian Open finals where they're 5 or 6 hours, but the average game time does stretch. And it's about those players that don't just have the physique to get to all these balls, but the fact that they don't always get to play the shot that they would like to play when they get there. There's a frustration on clay, particularly against people with the, lots and lots of topspin. People like Nadal, the king of just keeping it super low and making people hit off their feet half the time. It's the mental side of, even if I track all these balls down in this long game, I'm going to have to hit a lot of shots that I would rather hit differently. And that's something I've seen even bother some of the most mentally strong players like Medvedev. You can just see the frustration in classic clay matches he's played where he's just sick of hitting it in these awkward spots.
Absolutely. And the obvious thing that we need to pay attention to as well is the sliding factor.
Yeah.
Sliding. Medvedev, especially the last 2 seasons, he's openly spoken about great clay court seasons here. You know what I mean? Like, I don't even want to show up. You know what I mean? He a guy who's been solidified in the top 3 in the world over the past few seasons, just dreading the fact that he's got to go and play on this stuff called clay. And the results showed he couldn't stand up. He was falling all over himself. He was always out of position and seemed to be, we know he loves to play deep in the court. Guys were drop shotting him even more as they do when he's on a hard court. And he just didn't have the traction to move and track down balls and be balanced and in position like he can on a hard court. We know on a hard court, absolute, beast in terms of getting around the court, covers more ground than anybody else, loves to start back deep in the court on return and then work his way in. But he just creates all kinds of problems for guys on a hard court. We haven't seen someone do that like he does, probably rarely ever. A guy 6'6" that can move like he can on a hard court. And then he's just failed to, transition onto the clay court. Now he's been able to do it a little bit better over the last 12 months, and his results have showed in that. Now he's able to get, win a couple of main draw matches, perhaps get into a quarterfinal and until he runs into an elite clay courter. But previously, Josh, he was losing first round. I think he went on a streak there where he couldn't even get out of the first round at, whether it was Masters level or 250 level on the clay. And, he was open about it. That's what we love about Medvedev. He speaks his mind and he gives good press conferences. So
they're the best. He's super funny and very, very intelligent person. I guess the other thing, just before we move on with the clay, also just the routine for players can't be quite as smooth. There's dust coming up off the court if it's windy. That Roland Garros court particularly tends to have some strange gustiness that maybe is a little bit more unsettling than the other major, like show courts or the big courts are. And I know in the past that's upset, like Novak. He's a little bit susceptible to when the conditions aren't right, that it can get in his head a little bit. But, just having dust in your eyes if you wear contacts, for example, or having to clean your shoes all the time. I mean, the guys that have done it more, obviously growing up, are used to it. But there's just those extra little fatiguing processes that players have to go through that's not just as smooth as I go wipe some sweat off and then I'm ready for the next point.
Yeah, different elements as well. You failed to mention there the classic of when they fall over on the clay as well. Yes. And they're right there doing commando rolls through the clay courts and then they get up and they look like they need to take a quick shower.
Yeah.
There's that scenario as well, which is an absolute nightmare. I just said it gets in your socks, it gets in your shoes, and if you're not accustomed to that, or you don't enjoy that side of it, you're in for a long journey. Once the clay court season comes around. Now, there's the aspect of in terms of conditions. As you said, windy days can create all kinds of havoc out there for players, and then also you've got the temperature out there. Nadal likes it. Likes to play. He always liked to play in Paris at the French Open, on those hot days where it was high 27, 28 degrees or early, low 30s, for example. And, the reason why I love that is because his heavy topspin, he could get the ball up higher into the backhand corner of his opponent, of the right-hander, which was the pattern of play, which gave Federer fits for years and years and years. And Nadal, no matter what was going on in terms of, form guide or anything like that at all, as soon as he played Federer, you knew that was the pattern. And I'm going to do that for 3-4 hours, and I'm eventually going to win this match because I'm going to break you down. Yeah. Remember Leighton Hewitt speaking there years ago, saying that he played Nadal there at the French Open, on a hot day there on the centre court, and he said it was almost impossible. Leighton had the two-hand backhand, as we know, and he said the ball was just jumping up like non-stop. And we know Leighton was one of the best movers out there and one of the best defenders that the game's ever seen. And he said he just felt like it was just constantly coming at you high, over your head, shoulder, level and above, over and over and over again. And he said eventually you just wear down because he just continues to just play that, pummel you and pummel you and pummel you. And guys like Nadal, as we know, relentless and disciplined. And, that's why his record is the greatest record that's ever been seen on a clay court. He grew up on it. He's disciplined like, no other player we've really seen. And that's the way you have to be, on the clay. And some great matches over the European summer, that's for sure. But it's interesting, the guys that have definitely prefer the hard courts, seeing them transition onto the clay and not getting half the results that they're used to week in, week out during the hard court season.
Yeah, exactly. And one player that we did speak about, but it didn't make the episode. It made the cutting room floor because listening back, we're probably pretty overly harsh on the guy. It was Tsitsipas. So since we last spoke, he's gone on to win Monte-Carlo, and in quite convincing fashion, as it turns out. So for those who didn't keep up, semi-final Sinner in 3, that was pretty convincing. 6-4 Steph and then 6-3 Sinner. So Sinner wasn't rolling over by any means. He was putting up a fight. And then Steph got across the line 6-4 in the third set. And then pretty much just demolished Casper Ruud. Like Ruud had really nothing to offer, particularly in that first set. He was just so overpowered. And we were questioning off air, I guess, for the lack of a better term, Kaufman, whether Tsitsipas was at the level that he needs to be or even the level that he's captured in the past to be competitive now that the slightly younger generation is so strong. And within a week, he's proven that, at least on clay, he's still one of the guys.
Spot on, Josh. And, countless conversations with guys out there in terms of the Tsitsipas, where's he at? And just when you think that, he's probably not playing well enough to find that form where, that top 3, top 4 form, that, the elite to the elite level on the ATP Tour, he puts in a week like he just has, where he wins Monte-Carlo for the third time. And the discussion was, after that week, Josh, we spoke about it and we're like, look, clay's definitely his best surface. I don't think there's any question about that. We know that he has had, great success on a hard court. But it just seems that when he gets on the clay, regardless of how his form is, he seems to find his comfort zone. Winning for the third time there in Monte-Carlo, he's backing it up again this week with some good results. So just when you think that you can sort of move his piece of the puzzle to the side and out of that that threat for a Grand Slam title, so to speak, he puts his name back in there, and it's frustrating because it's like, make your mind up, Tsitsipas. Do you want to be involved in the Sinner discussion, in the Alcaraz discussion, in there with Novak, or don't you want to be? So it's an interesting one. As I said, he's backing it up again this week. French Open will be the big one for mine. If he can get back to where he was at there a few seasons ago, where he led Novak 2-0, let that one slip. I don't think he's been the same player since, probably because the first 2 sets, I should say, that final, amazing level of tennis, and really made me a believer that, like, gee whiz, like, that's an incredible level to win the first 2 sets there. And we know Novak was able to come back once again, and I really felt that he may not get back there, Tsitsipas, and have that same opportunity to win one. But you know what? He's put his name right back in there again. A few weeks out from Roland Garros, and I'm really curious to see if he can back it up and make a semi and make a final, and maybe win it. Who knows? He's on fire right now.
I always know with Tsitsipas, where he's at. And I remember he did this in the World Tour finals. He can get this blank expression over his, not so much just his face, but his whole manner, that he's completely unaffected by what's happening in the moment. And he can also be hyper emotional and distracted and look into the box too much and talking and, you know, approaching on coaching violations, all these things in the past that he kind of existed in two minds, and it kind of separated whether he was elite or looking like he wasn't really even competitive sometimes. You didn't know who you were going to get. The two matches that I watched in full this week, the Sinner and Casper Ruud, he had that slight detachment from his errors that the truly elite players have. That even if it's a massively frustrating moment or you're on top in the point and you end up losing it, he was letting out a little bit of emotion, but it generally seemed pretty positive, but he kept his focus and he looked confident. Like there wasn't any period in either of those two matches where I was looking at, particularly against Ruud, where I was looking at a guy that looked like he was going to lose. And sometimes when players are completely detached, you're like, do you realize what's going on here?
Yeah.
Like you're detached completely from the moment. This was more like a positive sort of emotional state, because we know that he has the physical tools and the touch to be competitive against anyone. It just was really positive to see him look as though he's not counting himself out of winning before it's happened.
One thing a couple of seasons ago that I definitely noticed with Tsitsipas was that was a given, week in, week out in all his matches, whether he was winning or he was losing, was that positivity with his body language.
Yeah, it's like he's up between serves.
Yeah, just real confidence in himself, and the way he handled himself out there on court and his persona. And then, as we've spoken about before, he's gotten away from that a little bit, and hence his performance hasn't been as consistent, where he gets a little bit internal and, as you said, starts screaming at the players' box, or letting outside elements really get in. And you really find that when he's in that mode that from a couple of seasons ago, where it's just nothing but positivity coming, chest out, head up, in between points, and going through his between point routine. When he's in that mode and that frame of mind, he's really locked in mentally, and as you said, not paying attention to little things that can unravel a player, so to speak. And, he's not paying attention to the errors, understanding that, hey, I want to get around and hit as many forehands as I can. He's one of those guys that, the total package when it's on display, he's one where you go, I'll tell you what, he's a real game changer. Yeah. And, it's just lacking that result in a big, I'm talking about the biggest matches, a slam final. He's had a crack at Novak a couple of times and failed like many have before. Yeah. But,
And when I said before, Kaufman, he had a blank expression, maybe that's the wrong term. It's just when he isn't affected by his own errors. He has a game style that's going to produce more errors than Novak and more than Medvedev, more than these guys that have very solid backhands, like low error backhands. His game is more a game that's exciting to watch. It's big hitting. It's the one-handed backhand. That's a beautiful thing when it's on, but it is going to create more errors when it's not.
Yeah.
And for a couple of years there, he was really on himself. Like, why can't I hit all these targets like these guys? And he would get in his own head.
Yep. And he's free-flowing, and I really feel that he's great for the sport.
Yeah.
No question about that. He can be a little bit of especially lately, a little bit of a lightning rod for attention with, some of the off-court stuff that's going on. He's been criticised previously for paying attention to too much off-court stuff with your social media and your YouTube channel, or, been talk of like whoever he's dating, blah, 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 find a different coach. So he's always being, talked about, not always in a positive light. But I think that just goes to show that the public and I guess the media, they expect more of him because of his talent. And we did talk about previously when he first came on tour, he wasn't really considered as as one of the best 19-year-olds in the world at the time. He may have been like top 4 or 5 for his age at that time, but he quickly ascended. By the time he was 20 years of age, he was the best 20-year-old in the world.
Yeah.
He was quickly into the top 15 in the world with some he had a red hot summer there over in the States in Indian Wells, Miami. Made the final in Indian Wells, and before he knew it, he was knocking on the door of the top 10 because he worked on the forehand, he worked on the on the serve, so he's got the work ethic, but he just lacks that marquee massive win where the world's watching.
Yeah, exactly. So this isn't the Stefanos Tsitsipas podcast, so we will move on, guys. So let's talk about what's been going on this week on the dirt. So is there anything that's got you excited about this week? Is there anything you're seeing from certain players form-wise or?
Well, I think the exciting thing is, and it's the obvious one for all the tennis lovers out there, Nadal, coming back to Barcelona to play, was supposed to start obviously last week, couldn't do that. So good to see him actually on court, win a main draw match, and then went down to Diminar pretty comfortably. I think it was, looking at the scoreline and seeing some of that match there. But overall, he's optimistic. He says, "Look, let's try for next week now. Let's get a little bit more court time." And ultimately, he's looking to be at his best. What that means right now for Nadal, we don't know, but just be at his best physically and mentally that he can be, considering his injury woes for the French Open, which is smart from him. He doesn't want to come out and play 4 or 5 tough matches week one. He's already had an experience in Australia which wasn't great, where he won a couple of main draw matches, and then by match 3, obviously his body let him down. So be aware of that. Clay court tennis, a bit of a softer surface than the hard court, so that certainly helps his cause. But that's the most exciting thing, I think, in the world of tennis, was the great man was back on court, and let's hope he can continue and win some main draw matches next week, and as well as at the French Open. That's the standout for me.